Hello, welcome to the Inside Knowledge podcast for people with IBS. I'm Anna Mapson, and this is episode 165. This episode is about low FODMAP meal planning and how to make things easier on yourself. If you're following the diet for the first time or you've just got into a bit of a routine with things, this episode is going to hopefully give you some ideas of how to spice up the diet a bit, make it a bit easier to follow. And if you're new to the low FODMAP diet, it's going to help you assess how to put a meal together without going into a spiral of thinking, well, I can't have that, and feeling very confused. So let's have a think about what the diet is and what you can eat and what you can't eat. I'll give you some meal examples as well. And then also just wanted to let you know you can download my low FODMAP diet starter kit, which contains a 2-day menu. So if you're really stuck, even at the end of this episode, you can get some examples of the kinds of things I would give my clients. It is only 2 days, but it includes different lunches, breakfasts, dinners, everything really, to give you a little taster of some of the ways that you can make low FODMAP taste nice and try and enjoy this time while you're on a restrictive diet. Okay, if you're staring into the fridge tonight thinking, what on earth am I going to eat this week? Or what am I going to eat tonight? Listen to this episode and work through some options and think about how to create a healthy, balanced, low FODMAP diet that you can stick to for a couple of weeks. Remember, this restriction phase of your diet should only be followed 2 to 6 weeks. And then we need to go through that reintroduction process. If you're not feeling better at all on the low FODMAP diet, then it's really important that you just start eating the higher FODMAP foods. This is not a diet you follow forever, as I'm sure you've heard me say many, many times. Low FODMAP diet meal planning can be really tricky because a lot of your favorites might feel out of reach. A lot of those common meals that you normally may have as part of your family's repertoire are now high FODMAP. So thinking of things like spaghetti bolognese, lasagna, curry, a chili. All of these start with onions and garlic. All of them have tomatoes. They have beans and pulses sometimes. And you might just feel like everything has to be very plain and very boring when you're on the low FODMAP diet. So I hope this session is going to give you some ideas of how to spice it up a little bit, give yourself some more interesting tastes and flavors, which can help you really enjoy your food a bit more. Because when people are following a very set diet for a long time, it becomes quite repetitive. You can lose interest in eating. And then I find people tend to lose weight, not only because they're restricted in their food choices, but they also just appetite goes because the food is so unappealing and boring. It's important actually to try and vary your low FODMAP meals. It's important to keep refreshing what you're eating. And there's many more fruit and vegetables, I will almost guarantee, than what you're eating now. Most people are eating a very small selection of foods which they know to be low FODMAP. There could be lots of other things that they haven't tried for a long time or they haven't understood are low FODMAP. So we can go through those in this session as well. I like to try and help people start from where they are now. So one of the first steps I would advise you to do is to start looking at the meals you normally have and think which ingredients are high FODMAP and that you're going to need to change, or where can you make some swaps. Some meals, like spaghetti bolognese, for example, might be quite tricky at first. If it's important to you to have those meals, then we can think about ways to incorporate a low FODMAP version. But you may find it easier just to eat different foods during this time when you're restricting your meals. It's important in a way that you don't throw everything out and start eating completely different food, because I want you to feel comfortable whilst you're eating this new diet. I want you to feel like you haven't just lost a part of yourself, and food does play a big part. I recently worked with someone who was trying to avoid going on the low FODMAP diet because they had followed it for a while, a few years ago, and their family really struggled with it. They found it boring because the family were all eating the same foods. So they were very reluctant for my client to go through the restriction phase again. However, I've sort of shown them some different ways and things that they can eat that hopefully will be appealing to the rest of the family. So first of all, I would start from where you are. That is the first thing to do, is look at what you're currently eating, look at the ingredients of each meal, and think about where you can make some swaps and where you can just alter things slightly, but still keeping the main essence of that meal. Then I like to try and think about the main formula for creating a balanced, healthy diet. And that would be starting each meal thinking about your protein, your fats, and your carbs. Those are our three main macronutrients that we want to try and balance throughout the day. Now, each meal does not need to be perfectly balanced. Each time you eat, it doesn't have to have all of those elements every time, but certainly throughout the day and essentially throughout the week, that is important. We need to have protein, fats, and carbs in our diet in good amounts. Let's start with protein, because most protein sources are a low FODMAP source of energy and a really good place to start. So you can have as much meat, fish, eggs, seafood as you like, because there are no FODMAPs in that. So it's a really good place to start, gives you some energy, and you need to keep up your energy whilst you're on a restricted diet, because there will be times when you can't find anything that suits you, or that you're eating less than you want to do because there are no low FODMAP choices. So we do need to make sure that your meals are kind of giving you enough when you're restricting a lot of choices. Protein, you can have as much as you want, as many times a day as you want. With vegetarian proteins, we've got a slightly different issue, because vegetarian proteins also contain fiber, which is partly what makes them so healthy. If you think about tofu or beans and pulses, they're a great source of fiber for your gut, but that fiber, when it's eaten in larger amounts, can be rapidly fermentable. So the low FODMAP diet is removing highly fermentable foods or rapidly fermentable foods to try and ease the pressure on your gut, try and reduce the amount of the gas that the microbes are creating. But when you're eating vegetarian proteins, you're getting the protein element, of course, but you're also getting the fiber. And low FODMAP portions of tofu are sufficient for you to have as your main source of protein. You can have 170 grams of tofu per sitting, and that gives you enough protein to be your main source of protein for that meal. So there's no issue with that. The problem is with other vegetarian sources, such as beans and pulses, is you can't eat enough of them in the low FODMAP amounts to give you enough protein. So for example, you can only have 2 tablespoons of lentils, and then it becomes a high FODMAP meal. So we would want to keep the pulse portions very, very small. If you are struggling with vegetarian protein sources and you live in the UK, I have a guide that contains some of the main brands that we have available in the supermarkets and a couple of the supermarket brands as well. In this guide, it says which FODMAP group is in each product and whether it's high protein or not. And I think I've got a list in there of whether it's vegan or not as well. So check out that. I'll put a link in the show notes, but it's only probably suitable for people who live in the UK because you might not have those brands elsewhere. It's a good place to start, and it will give you some places for you to check the ingredients for yourself. So it looks at whether it's got onion and garlic in it, and whether it's got pea protein or wheat protein, for example, and those kind of things you might want to consider depending on your tolerances and where you might react to certain FODMAP groups. So that's protein, vegetarian protein. Now we want to think about carbohydrates. Good carbohydrates for you to base your meal around are rice, potatoes, oats. You can also have other grains like quinoa, buckwheat, and millet. And these are all good low FODMAP versions of kind of energy sustaining carbs that are really good to have in there. Oats are really good, and you do not need to get gluten-free oats unless you've got celiac disease, of course. But normal oats will be fine. You don't need to worry about that for the low FODMAP diet. So a great place to start for breakfast, for example. I'm going to go through some example meals in a minute. So you've got protein, you've got some carbs, then we want to think about some low FODMAP vegetables. We want to think about some flavors as well. Another important element of the meal is to think about fats. So you don't need to be adding a lot of fat to your diet or sloshing olive oil over anything, but you also don't want to be completely fat-free. It's not a FODMAP element. It's just that we do need some fats in our diet, particularly healthy fats. Think about nuts, a small element of avocado, olive oil, olives, oily fish. These are really good healthy sources of unsaturated fats that are going to be very good for your cardiovascular system and important to include. Fats help us feel a little bit more satiated from the food as well, help us enjoy it, and just needed for core functioning in the body. The other element that's really important is flavour. So it could be things like tamari or soy sauce, could be citrus, like a squeeze of lemon. You can have ginger, and I'll come on to some of these in the swaps element as well. Main issues that people get in terms of putting meals together is how to start a meal when you're not starting with onions, garlic, maybe tomato sauce, and a wheat-based carbohydrate. So I'm going to think about a few swaps for those, and then I'll come on to a few meal ideas in terms of helping you put together a plan. Onion and garlic can be an element that people really miss on the low FODMAP diet. So good ways around this is to have oil infused with the taste of garlic. So in order to do this, you have to have a small bottle of oil and put some cloves of garlic in. You can take the skin off, but don't crush the garlic into the oil, because then the FODMAP elements are going to leak out into the oil. You put it in there whole, the flavour will get in the oil, and you can pour that oil into your cooking, use it as a base, but don't put the garlic in, because the garlic is what contains the FODMAP. No garlic on the low FODMAP diet during your restriction phase, but you can get the taste of it through this oil. You can't use garlic powder. That does still contain some of the FODMAPs. All right, so the same with onions. You can't use onion powder, but you can use the green tops of spring onions, and you can use chives, which have an oniony taste. So if you're really missing onions and garlic, that is two ways to get a little kick to your flavours, get things going. Pasta and bread can be another thing that people really miss. I understand why this is so important, because we really rely on these wheat-based carbs a lot as the main basis for a lot of our meals. So thinking about good alternatives, gluten-free bread can be an option for some people. You do need to check whether it's actually low FODMAP or not, though, because a lot of the ingredients they put in there will contain inulin, for example, or a lot of high fibers, because they're trying to improve the elements of the bread to make it more high fiber, but doesn't mean it's low FODMAP just because it's gluten-free. So you need to check the ingredients on the back. You can use brown rice pasta, which is probably my preferred option for gluten-free pasta. I do find the corn-based sort of yellowy ones don't have a great texture, and you might not really take to those, but experiment with any gluten-free pasta that you like and see how you get on. You can have one piece of white bread on the low FODMAP diet, and you can have one small piece of sourdough bread as well. So it's not completely gluten-free diet. It's not wheat-free. Again, remember I said at the beginning, it's all about portion sizing, which means it's tricky. So it's not a gluten-free diet, but you have to think about the portions of wheat per meal. Milk and like lactose or dairy is another thing that people will struggle with, but a lot of supermarkets will sell lactose-free milk. You don't need lactose-free cheese. I'm just going to say that. It's kind of a marketing scam, because there really is hardly any lactose in cheddar anyway. If you look at the back of the packet and it says the carbohydrate content of cheese, it's normally 0.01, and that is very low lactose. So if you're eating cheddar, you don't need it to be lactose free. The same with Parmesan. You can have a little bit of that normal cheddar, normal Parmesan on your meals, and it helps to give a bit of flavour. So again, it's not a dairy free diet. You don't have to cut it out completely, and you can still enjoy a little bit of cheese, especially if you choose like the stronger flavoured ones. It will give you more flavour for a smaller amount. So really aged, well, strong cheddar or Parmesan, stuff like that will help. You don't need as much of it to give you the same flavour. So before we kind of launch into the actual meal planning, I guess I just wanted to say, to reiterate that it is all about portion sizing. So it's not one food is in or out. There are some foods you can eat a lot of before they become high FODMAP. Some foods you don't eat much at all. Cherries, it's like 3 cherries and you're high FODMAP already. That's hardly anything, right? But say sweet corn, you can eat 240 grams of it before it becomes high FODMAP. So it does depend on the food. It depends on the amount you eat. Now, the other really important thing to mention about FODMAP planning is that it is just per meal. It's not for the whole day or every time you have a poo that resets the boundary. It is much more about what you eat in that meal, and then another like 4 or 5 hours later you can have the same amount of the food again, and that would be considered a low FODMAP approach. You don't need to keep count of what you've eaten across the day and sort of keep balancing FODMAPs in that way, but just trying to create as much variety really as possible is the best way to keep up your nutrient intake and make sure you're getting a broad and balanced diet. I hope that gives you a little overview of where to start, what you can eat. Now let's think about some actual meals that you can try and how to put the meals together. Breakfast can be something people find quite tricky, particularly if you're someone who's always just had a few pieces of toast before you get out to work in the morning, and now you can't have toast and you don't like gluten-free bread, perhaps. My other comment on just having toast for breakfast is that there's no protein in that, and we want a good source of protein. So ideally, each day you're going to hit a minimum of 50 grams of protein. Now that is an absolute minimum for stopping muscle wastage. It is not optimum for muscle building. It's not optimum for regaining weight if you need to lose weight. It's just to stop you wasting away. And depending on your body size, you may need a lot more than that. So we do need protein, and having a piece of toast is not going to cut it. If you don't eat breakfast, then you also need to think about how are you going to make sure you're getting at least 50 grams of protein, somewhere near your 25 to 30 grams of fiber, and hitting your 5 a day in fruit and veg and all of those things. It's really hard to do in 2 meals a day. Really hard. So I suggest that you do start with 3 meals a day, which includes you having breakfast. So let's go through 2 options for what you can eat. Oats is my preferred source of carbs in the morning because it's really high in soluble fiber, which helps to create a firm but soft poo. So it's good for people who've got diarrhea-based symptoms or constipation predominant symptoms. It's really good source of carbohydrates, and you can make them into overnight oats. You can also start with porridge if it's a cold day. So there's lots of ways you can have them. Now you might say, hey, you said we need protein and there's not that much protein in oats, and you would be correct. So the ways you can top it up to make it more interesting but also more filling is 2 ways really. Firstly, you can start by adding a lot of nuts and seeds and berries as well to make it more interesting, to give you the flavour. So fruits that you can have blueberries, you can have a portion of raspberries. That's up to 70 grams of each of these, by the way. If you're having them all together, you might start hitting a high FODMAP amount. That's back to that FODMAP stacking. But if you have a handful of blueberries and a handful of walnuts, that's going to help you make it a bit more interesting, but also a bit more filling. Now, another way you can do this is to add a protein powder. And I know some people are quite against this, but for me, it's a really easy way to up your protein. You can use whey isolate powder, which, unless you're vegan, is a really easy source of protein that is low FODMAP, or you can use a low FODMAP protein powder. Whey protein isolate is very low in lactose, and 1 scoop of that in the morning added to your porridge or drunk on the side if you prefer is a great way to increase your nutrients and make sure you're getting a good start to the day in terms of protein. That will help slow the blood sugar balancing. Oats with some fruits, some nuts. You can also blend up some seeds and add those. So So blending up a mix of sunflower seeds, pumpkin seeds, chia seeds, linseeds, and adding a teaspoon or two of that. It's a great way to help that gut diversity and also add a bit of protein and a bit of healthy fats. If you don't have oats for whatever reason, you can also swap that for quinoa or for millets. You can make a porridge out of both of those. Some people enjoy that. Now, if you're someone who prefers more of a savoury breakfast, as I mentioned before, you've still got access to all the meats, eggs that you like on the low FODMAP diet. So I would still try to sneak in some vegetables where you can, or something with a bit of fibre to start the day. So if you're just having eggs, maybe you want to add some bread. You could also have like turkey and cheese omelette, and you could add some vegetables into that, like spinach. And then you could also have a piece of fruit. So something like half a banana. You could have a handful of berries. Like that, those two breakfasts, you could alternate those throughout the week, and that would give you a good start to your day. Now, thinking about lunch, depending on where you are and what you're doing and time of year and everything else, we've got a couple of different options. One of my favourites is just to have leftovers of what you had the night before. Somebody I worked with years ago was like quite horrified about this. Like, why would I eat the same thing again? For me, it's really easy. I just love being able to make too much the night before. The next day, because I work at home, I can reheat it. It's easy. If you go to work and you have access to a kitchen, you can do that too. But some people can't do that at their work, or there's nowhere to store it cool and heat it up. So then you need to think about, what can you take? So we've mentioned before about the carbs that are okay on the low FODMAP diet, and that is rice and potatoes, and you can have a lot of those, or quinoa. So you could make a salad out of some low FODMAP vegetables and one of these grains or some potatoes mixed up together. Then there's two options depending on the time of year and how you like to eat it. So you can have roasted vegetables that you create a tray of them and just keep them in the fridge and bring them out for various different things. So I really like a tray of roasted root vegetables over the winter, carrots, bit of sweet potato, parsnips, and you can then reheat these and use them again, mix them with one of your grains, create a nice kind of warming salad in the winter. Now you need to add some protein into that, but it could be a piece of cooked chicken, some mackerel from the fridge. So those kind of things are a great way to get a mixed warm salad. If you're someone who just likes something very, very simple, you can have like a chicken wrap. So a wrap with some chicken salad in it. You can put some mayo, some cucumber, a couple of slices of tomato are fine, maybe some chopped carrots on the side to nibble at, and lactose-free yogurt, something like that. So that's kind of an easy way if you're taking a packed lunch. If you haven't had eggs for breakfast and you are working at home, then eggs and toast is another really great, quick, easy lunch that is easy to put together. Now for dinner, you want to think about a couple of different options. So the easiest way to start, if you're confused on the low FODMAP diet, is to start with very plain, basic foods. So a pile of rice, some fish or chicken or whatever kind of meat you have, and then a couple of bits of vegetables like some green beans, some carrots. That's really easy, simple, doesn't take long to cook. If you're wanting to make something with a bit more flavour, a stir fry can be a good idea as well. So you can have rice noodles, the very thin white rice noodles, or you could have rice. And then you can add to that your protein. So whether you're having prawns or tofu, fry those up with some soy sauce. You can add to the vegetables, you can have a bit of broccoli, some pak choi, you can have some edamame beans, you can have Monash-certified, you can add a couple of mini sweet corn, a bit of cauliflower, and a little bit of cabbage. Like, that's a lot of different vegetables. You might not be able to get exactly the same flavor profile that you're used to, because you might be missing garlic, you might be missing spring onions, but you can use the top of the spring onions. You can still create a bit of flavor and try to draw out something that's similar to what you're craving. And lastly, just to think about some snacks. So fruits, you can have kiwi, oranges, a pineapple. These are really good choices if you're fancying something sweet. You can also have a couple of squares of dark chocolate. So again, it's not like a chocolate-free diet. So do feel like you can have snacks. You can also have things like rice cakes with peanut butter. You can have a couple of oat cakes. There are snacks that you can have that are low FODMAP. plain crisps, also low FODMAP. They're just potatoes and fat, right? So, and salt. So some of the foods that you might have thought were off bounds are allowed. Some of the things that you maybe didn't realize were low FODMAP are possible, but remembering that this isn't forever. This isn't a diet that you have to stick to for the rest of your life. It's just a period of time where you're trying to see if it resolves your symptoms. If you are struggling with it, you want a bit of help on how to get started on the diet, my low FODMAP diet starter kit is free and you can download it from the show notes. People have found it useful as a little way to see kind of things that you can eat and how you might be able to just eat more of some of the foods than you realised. And if you're getting really stuck on the low FODMAP diet and you don't know how to get off of it, I've also got a new product called the Low FODMAP Diet Exit Plan, which is more about helping you stop being low FODMAP and how to get off the diet. Because actually, whilst the diet is tricky to start, and hopefully this has given you a few ideas, it's also much harder to stop, and which is what I found, which is why I put together the exit plan, and that it consists of 3 videos explaining to you more about how to stop the diet, the exact process that I use with my clients to help them expand their diet. But it also contains a module on gut health rebuilding, like how to support your gut microbes through eating a more diverse diet, which particular types of fiber you need to be eating, and how to include them in your diet. So if that's you and you're not struggling with starting, but you're struggling with stopping, then check out the Low FODMAP Diet Exit Plan, which you can see also in the show notes. And lastly, if this podcast episode has taught you anything, I would love it if you would give me a review or rating on whatever podcast app you're listening on, like this person did, who gave me a lovely review and said, "Nobody I know wants to talk about IBS symptoms, but Anna does. I love this podcast. It's informative but casual, and the episodes are the perfect length for listening during a nice walk. I get new insights into IBS with each one. Thank you for being my gut health friend." Well, thank you for leaving me such a lovely review. And if you want to join this listener in leaving a nice review, I would really, really appreciate it. Okay, back next week with some more insights into gut health and IBS. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Inside Knowledge podcast. Better digestion for everyone.